record. So we should be recording now. It tells me that we are.
Great.
So good morning, Christian.
Good morning.
For our audience here, I'm sure they all know who I am, Bob Morton, Director of Training at LDC. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the boys and girls?
Absolutely. So my name's Christian Van Nieuwerburgh. I've actually been living in the UK now for about 23, maybe 24 years. My nationality is Belgian. I was born in Lebanon. I grew up there. My mum's Japanese. So I've got a kind of a multicultural background. Professionally, I've always been interested in the question of how we can help learners. I'm talking broadly here, anybody learning. How can we create better environments for them to learn? And that's what got me into coaching. I discovered coaching along the way. And for about the last 10 years or so, I've been researching coaching. I've been teaching it. I've written some books about coaching. So you could say, Bob, I'm just a huge advocate and fan of coaching, and I continue to learn about it. I'm always curious about it. So looking forward to this conversation, Bob.
Me too, Chris. I mean, we use your book, An Introduction to Coaching Skills.
Wonderful.
This one looks nice and shiny and new. It's because, believe it or not, I wore the old one out. It fell apart. We use this on our level 5 coaching course that we deliver, but I'm starting to use it on our level 3. And I just love the principles inside it. It is so simple. And I recall meeting you for the first time, which we were just chatting about a little earlier, and you telling me about coaching being a relationship and a conversation. And if I'm totally honest, it went, oh, what? What does that mean? And I see the same look on the faces of instructors that I have the same conversation with. They say, no, it's much more than that. But it really isn't. I mean, we'll come to that a little further on. So Belgian father, a Japanese mother, and born in Lebanon.
That's right.
That's quite a mix.
You know, I do love that, because there's so many different cultural influences. So my father, both my mom and dad have passed away, but when they were around, my father would be bringing me kind of the Western perspective on things when it came to, everyday interactions, how to behave in society, what we need to be learning about. My mother brought me, of course, the Far Eastern perspective, and it was different. And just in terms of how you interact with people in society, this thing about respect that for me is critical. Probably it's my mom who taught me about the value of treating people and things with respect. And then growing up in the Middle East, a wonderful place, where hospitality and personal relationships are more important than anything else. So maybe a lot of this learning, I've managed to draw it together. And thank you for using that book. I really appreciate it, Bob. I really spent a lot of time thinking about that book and saying, look, what would be the best written companion we can provide for people who are going to be on this journey? So I did try and really think, what's the most useful thing that can be said? So it's a companion, really, that book. I have.
I really like it. I love the videos that go alongside it, because you see it actually in practice. And in honesty, we've stolen that kind of principle. We're starting to do that with our training program. We're about to announce some big changes in the way we do training.
Yeah.
We're taking finally a really large step away from tell, and doing much more ask. And it's interesting for me to note with the mix. I'm trying to think of the question I'm trying to ask you. The mix that you come from, and then looking at the videos for the advanced coaching practice book, where you're dealing with working in different cultures and problems that brings. And of course, it occurs to me while I'm watching those that the relationship and the conversation, if they're right, almost anything's possible.
Yeah.
That kind of thing brought peace to the Middle East.
Yeah.
and to Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Did it not?
I think that coming back to the quality of the relationship, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. And for me, there has to be a sense of mutual respect. Now, of course, not everybody is the same, and different people will have different levels of seniority or hierarchy, or some people have more experience than others in different things. But, I think in order to build a good relationship, there has to be a sense of the fact that we're of equal value, that both people, whatever their backgrounds, whatever their profession, their heritage, that they have equal value at that very basic level of human beings. And sometimes our mindsets can get in the way of that. So if we convince ourselves that we're better than other people for whatever reason, then that really damages the quality of the relationship, and it's not respectful. And I think we, particularly, people who look white, people who are male, we have to be even more attentive to this, just because of the power dynamics that have existed, at least over the last couple hundred years. That we don't take any preconceptions. Just to give you an example, Bob, we used to use the term third world to talk about certain parts of the world. That's not a very respectful way of talking about different parts of the world. But even now, the more politically correct term, developing countries, emerging economies, it's almost, there's still this sense that they're developing towards some sort of advanced state that we're in, or that they're emerging towards being economies more like ours. And even in language like that, there is a sense that we're not of equal value. We're actually better, we're morally, so I could talk for hours about this, but that's just as an example of the mindset we need to bring.
Well, I think it's easy to put ourselves and our methodologies and our processes on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And the ego thing can allow us to let other people do that to us. And then we seem to think that that we convince ourselves we have some kind of authority, moral or otherwise.
Yeah.
And what I've been working hard on in my own practice and my own development is trying to make sure that the relationship is right, and putting things in place that help me to do that. And I'm finding, and it's sort of, I suppose it's part of the contracting, isn't it, that we talk about expectations. Mm-hmm. What do we expect from each other?
Yeah.
And in that conversation, we're kind of making promises to each other. And we're also saying that each of us can hold the other to account at any point that promise has not been kept.
Yes.
And there'll be no negative connotation to that. It'll be just a stop. And I'm reminded, a learner driver I was teaching, and the early messing around we're doing here. And every once in a while, we'd stop just for a little break in activity, and we'd reflect on what we'd done. And I would always add, because I was trying to discover, what do we do that you like? Is there anything that we do that you don't like? I asked one day for the first time, and she stopped and looked. And she said, well, I would have never said anything, but seeing you've asked, and I thought, oh. She said, when I'm having my first attempt at something, would you shut up?
No.
Right.
Amazing.
And I thought, instead, my ego was hurt. How dare you question the mighty instructor? Do you know people pay good money for this? So, and it was ego driven. I know it was now. At the time I did that, all right, and smarty pants, on you go. So I went, yeah, okay. And she nailed it.
Oh, nice. Even worse.
And you suddenly realize that, well, hang on a minute. How much does she need me? Well, this is the traditional approach. Explain what to do, and then talk you through the first attempt, then prompt you, and then let you have a go on your own. Yeah. And I started to question, do we really need this?
Yeah.
The answer is no, we don't, because we're smart. We're ridiculously smart human beings. We can work this simple nonsense out. Quantum physics, perhaps you couldn't find your own way through that, but driving a car, you already have the skills, the manual dexterity, the spatial awareness.
Yeah.
Um,
And I like what you're saying, Bob, about so that contracting, the making promises to each other, I think is an important part of a respectful relationship, because we're setting out the kind of the parameters of the conversation together.
yeah,
And both people can say, yeah, I'd like it to be like this. And I do think role clarity is important, because, and particularly maybe with driving instruction, you know, what's different from some other types of coaching perhaps is that the driving instructor does have advanced knowledge about the skill that the learner is learning. So it is important to have a conversation about that, because like you say, it's easy for the learner to assume, well, this person knows everything, they're just going to tell me, so I don't need to take any action myself. I'll
sure.
just wait for them to tell me. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I think that having the conversation is important. And then just on your example there, the very fact that you're asking for their opinion of how do you think this is going, that already I think is building the relationship. And it's a great example, because if you hadn't said that, the person would have been thinking something without actually saying it, and that might be getting in the way of her learning.
But the reality is, after being initially sort of affronted, I thought, wow, it's a real challenge to the very way that we do things.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I wonder if I can roll this across other things. When you start to think a little broader, and, you know, when you're contemplating your navel, sat on a grassy bank after you've ridden your motorbike there, you think, well, does this apply to other things?
Yeah.
And, you know, we used to think it only applied, well, that's executive coaching. That's fine. Can't do that in a moving car. But you then think, well, it's not just about that, is it?
Mm.
Anytime I've ever been in trouble with my other half, it's because I've done something she didn't expect, or I have not met expectations. And it's just like, which is why we get into it's the lack of understanding, the lack of clarity that, you know, what's wrong? Nothing. Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. And you know, I've thought a lot also about this idea of a moving car or moving motorcycle. And I can see the argument for that. And, you know, I'd have no expertise in your area of specialism, but I can see the argument for saying, look, it's different because it's a moving car or it's a moving motorcycle. But then I've also coached in organizations where they're not in a moving car, but it's pretty similar. The consequences of making, bad decisions is almost as significant. So I can see what you're saying. In many ways, it's possible to say, well, that's executive coaching. We're in a car, so they're completely different things. But there's a lot of area of overlap as well.
Well, I have a question now that's not on my list. I think this cuts to the very nature of why driving instructors struggle with this.
Mm.
You know, I am the expert. I have the expertise.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was say to you, a very experienced coach, here's the criteria. There's the test standard in detail.
Wow.
There's the reflective log and the planner. These are targets, if we can, and they're the test targets and the national standard for driver and rider training. That's what we need to do.
Yeah.
To be able to meet that standard. Inside here, we've put best practice, some learning steps that you could do
right
to get to that.
Wonderful.
My argument is, if I give this to you,
yeah,
and I use it, you, without the knowledge, as a very experienced coach, will develop that individual further. What's your thoughts on that?
Wow, it sounds like a great, but I don't know. You put it here because it would be a lovely experiment to do. I do think the fact, look, a lot of this is about the credibility in the eyes of the learner as well, and that's an important step.
Yeah.
So, but what you're saying ties into the whole idea of the inner game of tennis. You know, Timothy Galway talks about this. You know, do you have to be an expert in tennis to coach somebody else to be an excellent tennis player? Really interesting questions that I need to mull over further. But certainly, you know, I was just thinking, I picked up a motorcycle just as a courtesy motorcycle for a few days from a dealer just yesterday. And the dealer popped out with me and said, you ride bikes like this already, don't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I don't need to show you where the indicators are or whatever. You know how to use it. And that was perfect, because, you know, if the person had gone through exactly, well, this is the indicator switch and this is how you change gear, and I know that already,
Yes.
it's actually irritating. It's not only, it feels like I'm being talked down to or patronized. You know, of course I've just come in on a motorcycle. You know, of course I know how to ride a motorcycle. So I think what I'm sure about, or relatively sure about, is that you know, the use of a coaching approach to support learner drivers is probably going to be a better learning experience for the client, in the sense that they feel treated with respect, that they're kind of the ones really taking ownership of their learning. But I think that for me, the big advantage is that I think the learning lasts longer if they've learned for themselves. And this happens in education as well, Bob. I mean, you know, school education, I mean, is that, you know, this idea of preparing people just for the test, which can be a consequence. If you say that's the only thing we're evaluating, I can see why people would say, well, teach them how to pass the test. But then we lose sight of what it's all about. It's not about the test. The test is just a measure to say, are you competent? But this is lifelong learning, I think.
And I think we justify it in all walks of it. Two of my children are teachers, and they're just about, we haven't got time. We haven't got time. Look at the curriculum. We've got all these other things to do. So that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And it becomes an excuse. I mean, yes, it's valid.
Yeah.
And again, we look at that as an industry and think, well, you know, there's only so much time, and everybody in our industry seems to think, or not everybody, but quite a lot of people seem to think coaching takes longer. It really doesn't, because on all the videos I've done, hundreds of hours of video, I never deliver the same lesson twice.
Really?
Because they've learned it for themselves.
Yeah.
And to get over this, to help me get over my ego and because I've got proof. If I intervene, I know I can make it work. And I assume learning has taken place. Well, it has, but it's temporary.
Yeah.
If I make them make connections with what they already know to what they don't know, then there's a synapse created, there's a neural pathway, and it lives there forever as long as they've got normal brain function. So what I tend to do to stop myself intervening, because this is a rambling answer here, I offer myself as a resource. Mm-hmm. But I also point out to them that the information I've got, you can also get. And by giving them this, and I suppose this is part of our coaching, our process, I can say, and we ask the question, what level of help do you want from me?
Yeah, brilliant.
I can demonstrate if you want. And what I'm finding is the more empowered they are, the less they want me. But they'll occasionally ask me, if you were doing that, what would you do? Oh, really? Okay. Well, I would probably do this. Do you want to try that?
Yeah.
But I'm never at any point saying this is what I do and that's what you should do. Because that's the way I was trained to do it. And it's a revelation, and it's a real problem for fledgling instructors who are becoming coaches.
Yeah.
And you've identified it in the advanced coaching practice book. My journey's mirrored in here.
Oh, wonderful.
About chasing different questions, in my attempts to be clever and to ask really slick questions, I'm not listening. I'm busy thinking rather than listening to what's being said and watching the body language and picking up on the little nuance. You know, are you okay with that? I think so. Oh, what would no so look like is the question. But we go, oh, well, okay, you think so, that's fine, I'll help you. Oh, there's a critical moment missed. And I'm starting to identify, as I get better at it, I'm starting to identify more and more and more of those little moments where you think, oh, tell me a bit more about it. And instead of, I'll slow down, I'm getting excited. Instead of fixing stuff all the time, and because I've got all the fixes, I have all those little magic things, and I know when it's right and I know when it's not. So let's say, for example, somebody's too close to a parked car. Traditionally, I would have just moved the steering away and gone, you're a bit close to that parked car. Why is it important not to be close to a parked car? With the why straight away puts them on the back foot. They've got to justify themselves now. Yeah. Where if I just do what I should do, move away from the car because it's now safe, I'll say, how are you deciding how much room to leave?
Mm. Yeah.
That's a conversation starter. I'm trying to encourage my new coaches to ask questions that start conversation. Always keep things safe, obviously, but ask a question that starts a conversation. How are you deciding what speed to travel at here?
Brilliant.
If they're not indicating to go left at a junction and there's a car behind, it's easy to say you've forgotten your indicator, but I say, where do you think the guy behind thinks you're going?
Yeah.
Now, there's a whole thought process got to go through there. They've got to put themselves in the frame of mind of the person behind.
Yeah.
And then, all right. And I find the learning much, much more powerful.
Yeah.
But it is a struggle when you're new, finding new coaching models and the search for new questions and trying to be slick with your question rather than asking a simple question and really listening out to the answer and seeking clarification. So if I've got this right, what you mean is, would that be right? And it gives them the chance to say, no, no.
Yeah.
And there's some little gems that come out. I remember intervening another learner. She was a joy. She owned the process. It was hers. And I stopped her using the dual brake one day because she was going to pull out in front of somebody. And I said, let's get around the corner. Let's have a chat about that. I said to her, why do you think I felt the need to intervene? And she looked me square in the face and said, is it because you're old and nervous?
Well.
Now, the conversation that came from that was a talk about propensity for risk taking.
Yeah.
And how it changes. So that was a magic conversation that came by really thinking about and listening. And it's just, and I've learned to do more and more of that. And and there's some extra bits of, we'll give you a shameless plug here. If you're watching this, you're into coaching, buy this book.
Thank you. If I can just, on a few of the things you said there, so I do really like the idea of thinking about advice. And one thing that really changed my practice was this concept of distinguishing between solicited and unsolicited advice. Right. And I think if we can put ourselves into a position where we only provide advice where it's asked for, that idea of yours, Bob, that we put ourselves forward as a resource to say, look, I've actually trained quite a lot of people to do this. You know, I've studied this. So if there's anything, you know, you're not sure, but you can ask me. Yeah. That leads to this notion of solicited advice, yeah, which I think is perfectly appropriate, particularly in situations like this. This, I also want to say how much I actually appreciate the work that driving instructors do. I do think it's a really, especially in the way we're talking, you are giving people life skills. So that example about propensity to take risk, that does apply in the car, but it applies to other things as well. So this is such valuable learning that, you know, we can convey if we take the coaching approach. Yeah. So I'm seeing we could take don't do that because you'll fail the test. Yes. So never do that again. There's been no learning about the junction or when to go into a roundabout. Whereas the way that you're describing, actually we're equipping, and often it's young people who are learning. I know it's not always young people. We're equipping young people with lifelong skills about taking personal responsibility. And then another thing, if I may, just to respond, is this constant flow of you're doing it wrong, you should have checked your mirror, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. That's incredibly demotivating for somebody. Yeah. And when I think what you want to do before you get somebody onto the road is build their confidence rather than, because they're going to be on the road without you. So if you, and I've had a personal experience in the UK with three different driving instructors. I got my license in Lebanon. It's not recognized by the United Kingdom. So as soon as I got here, those 23 years ago, I had to learn I had to take the test again. I had to do the whole theory test. And I'd been driving for 6 years by that point already. And so I asked for a driving instructor and I said, look, I've been driving, I need to take this test. Can you just I said, before anything else, the first hour, I said, just sit with me. I'll drive somewhere, and then just tell me what I need to do, how many hours, what do I, and this instructor, at the end of asked me to pull over in about 20 minutes and said, disaster, you're over the speed limit here, you didn't look over, you didn't do this. Gave me like a whole list of things that I hadn't done correctly. That was really demotivational. I didn't pursue driving lessons with this person because although there were a lot of things I did get wrong, and at no point did they acknowledge some of the things I got right. And I'm sure I got some things right because I did get from A to B, and and then I had a really wonderful instructor who took a real coaching approach. And the starting question, like you said, Bob, was, what do you think you already do really well? And I said, well, I think I parallel park pretty well. And the person said, and what are the things you need to work on? And I said, well, we don't have roundabouts in Lebanon. I don't really know how these things work. I don't know if the car's coming. So we actually spent our time better like that, rather than, because I'd been driving for 6 years, the thing about hill start or whatever, I can do that. So that was an interesting example of what you're talking about.
Well, I think it's useful. And again, we've got the test criteria in the back of our book, because we're bringing people through on an instructor training program who are very experienced drivers. They've got a test to sit, slightly more advanced, but we give them the criteria. And so there's the criteria. Where would you measure yourself against that just now?
Yeah. Brilliant.
And what do you need from me, from help? And sort of touching on the stuff you said before about solicited and unsolicited, there's a kind of midway point as well, isn't there? Would you mind if I gave you some feedback?
Yeah.
Is sometimes, and as long as you're not doing it all the time, because sometimes they'll feel too polite to say no.
Yeah.
Kind of setting the
That's
scene.
the risk, Bob, with, would you like me to give you some advice about that? Unless the relationship is very strong, there's a risk that people will be embarrassed or just say, oh, no, tell me. But I know there are times when, as human beings, we want to figure something out for ourselves. We're just really engaged with it. And for somebody to tell me, hey, would you like me to tell you or share something, can demotivate me at times. At other times, it might be just that bit of information that I need.
Well, it's the resource thing again, I suppose, isn't it? When, somebody in a situation like that say, all right, then, so they're the things you want to work on. Loads of approaches here. We could go and stand by a roundabout and watch it. I could talk you through it. You could have a go on your own. I'll keep you safe so you're not going to die. Or I can demonstrate it. Choose one of those.
Yes.
And it's then open, and it's an inclusive process. And I remember you saying you got a good instructor learning to drive. If you could offer that instructor advice, if you were going to take him from the introduction to coaching to the advanced coaching, what advice would it be?
So the good instructor.
Well, I suppose both.
Well, for the, I think for the one who highlights all of the flaws, I do think just a shift in thinking, or at least a balance, because and look, instructors of every kind, of course, they're going to notice errors more because they could be risky, they could lead. So I think it would just be to balance out, maybe to start with noticing some of the positives. And maybe had they asked me, what do you think didn't go well? I might have been able to say, well, I know I probably was doing a bit, the overtake or whatever.
Yeah.
So, maybe allowing me to do a little bit more of the talking in that example. And then the very good coach, I was in awe of her. I really highly I actually respected her driving skills and her credibility much more because of her approach. And I knew, and I would go to her and ask her, even if she said, yeah, that roundabout was okay, I would say, well, what else could I have done? What other things should I have? Yeah. And that's because I think this idea of resource is important. So what can the driving instructor do to make it clear that they are a resource? So maybe a slight improvement, although I was very happy with that experience, would be to be explicit about that at the beginning, because she wasn't. She just used a coaching approach. Yes. She didn't explain she was going to use it. So if she had just said, look, think of me as a resource, I'm not going to intervene, you look pretty good at what you're doing already, but ask me at any point, that might have been a tiny improvement there.
Yeah, I think that's a step I remember having to take, from going from using what I thought was a coaching approach, which is, Q&A and getting really good at that kind of stuff and making the questions nicer, to really seeing that it's the contracting end of things. It's making sure that they feel, what does it, Einstein said, he doesn't teach people, he creates the right environment for learning to happen. And Carl Rogers did a lot of work on that sort of stuff as well, isn't it? And if they feel comfortable, if they're not worried about making mistakes, if they know for sure, no matter what happens, you've got their back.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have a conversation about it, not a discussion about whose fault it was. But if it's understood by both parties, I don't think I really fully appreciated on the start of my journey how important that was. And then, of course, I've done the lunging to the other end of it, where you start looking at it and think, of course, the goals for driver education, which is all about, risk-taking, peer pressure. I had that as my agenda for a while. And I found that probably got in my way more than my ego had before.
Really?
Well, it was just, everything became about that.
Yeah.
Every conversation became about it. And the learners sometimes will go, you pick up on something. I started to have a video camera pointing into the car so I could pick up the full facial expression. Because sometimes you're just looking from the side, you can't always get it.
Really?
And we have conversations about that sort of stuff naturally, but I think I've made this switch from, in my head, I'm no longer teaching people to drive. I'm no longer teaching people to coach. It's just, I'm helping people make better decisions. And if you're a good decision maker, chances are you're a good driver. And the chances are you're safer, because people die because they make bad decisions. They drive too fast. They drive under the influence of drink, drugs, drive when they're tired, drive under peer pressure. So if we make better decisions,
I think better decisions in life, Bob, and I genuinely, that's what I was trying to say earlier. I think driving instructors do, because they work with such a big proportion of our population, that, this is really critical learning they're doing. Maybe they don't pick it up in school. So the examples you gave are great. I've had a couple drinks. What do I do? Do I get in the car? If the driving instructor has worked on things like that, that applies to lots of other scenarios which don't even involve a car, of making good decisions. So I think coaching is about helping people to make better decisions, and so is driving instruction. So I think there's a really strong connection there.
Well, and then of course, taking it to the next level, I suppose, I watched a discussion that you broadcast on YouTube. Yes, I'm stalking you. Discussing positive psychology coaching.
Yeah.
Now, I hadn't read this book then, but I had questions at the time, and it was really, it was fascinating. But what benefits do you think the positive psychology element brings to coaching?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a relatively recent part of my thinking to bring positive psychology more actively towards coaching. And I want to say, before I answer the question, that many of the best coaches are already doing what I'm going to be saying. The best coaches probably do this naturally. But my concern with coaching, and remember, I've been in this industry now for a little while, and I was thinking, maybe in some cases, coaches were being too rigidly focused on helping a person achieve the goal, no matter what, right? So I was thinking, maybe it's gone a little bit too far, that we're putting more pressure on the coachee to achieve this goal, where there might be cases where it's better for the coachee to abandon a particular goal, or to change it, or switch to a different goal. So that's when I thought positive psychology, which is the science of optimal functioning, it's also really interested in human well-being. It's all about how can we increase the well-being of people. I thought so for me, positive psychology coaching means a kind of coaching where we put the well-being of the individual, we give it at least equal importance as achieving the goal. So again, when you talk about contracting, that's part of it as well. So when I coach somebody now, I would say, I'm going to, here, listen to you, help you think things through. You come up with the ideas. And I'm also going to be interested in you and your well-being and the well-being of others. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And a good driving instructor is thinking about the well-being of their learner in the car, but also afterwards. You're thinking about their long-term well-being. So maybe, again, it is appropriate for your industry.
Well, it's interesting to kind of make a link with what you said there to something you alluded to earlier, that the learner driver who maybe doesn't want to learn. There are some of them paid for by parents, by a boss who wants them to have the license, so they have to tolerate this process. We also have it in the fleet training world, where perhaps I'm sat next to somebody who's been sent for retraining because they've crashed too many cars. They don't want to see me. They don't want to be in that car. This is a waste of their time. But generally, I've never really made this link before. I would generally open that up with, in the early days, I used to say, well, I've got a clipboard here. If I don't sign that, you don't go back to work, so you can mess me around as much as you want. It used to get their attention short term. But now I just say, well, look, we're both forced to be here, aren't we? Let's see if we can have some fun. What do you find the most fun about driving? Let's start a conversation. But again, it's back to relationship.
It is. So I would say, particularly when we're talking about coaching, that's a huge factor. And I know that people listening to this, they'll immediately pick it up. There's a huge difference between somebody who can't wait to get their driving license, who loves driving, who just, excited about it, and that other category of, I don't really want to learn, I don't see the point, or I'm not going to be driving anyway, or that is very different. And I think the coaching approach that I talk and think about is perfectly suited for those who want to learn how to drive. Now, what about that other category? I think you're right. I think the starting point is building the relationship. I'd say let's start with either coaching or training. I'd say let's go back to the relationship. And I've been in situations like that, not with learner drivers, but with executives who don't want to be there. And my approach is, tell me a little bit about what's going on. So how come you don't want to be here? What's been going on? By just listening respectfully, you build a relationship. And then absolutely we say, well, I'm being paid to be here. You've been asked to be here. How can we use this time well? So it would be, just to tie back to something you said earlier, Bob, I think a good rule of thumb, if we're saying we want to use a coaching approach, is wherever possible, give the client or the learner driver as many choices as possible. Always. That should be rule of thumb. Where possible, give choices. Like you said, would you like me to demonstrate? Do you want to talk it through? Do you want to have a go yourself? Every opportunity, I think, give people choices. It builds their sense of autonomy. It also helps them to feel like they're in the driving seat, literally.
Yes. You're getting buy-in, aren't you? And it's another reason that's used for driving instructors not to use this approach. Well, if I ask my learners, what do you want to do today? They just say, well, I don't know. Or they'll say, this is another classic one that I see around all the forums and the Facebook groups. Well, I asked my pupil what he wanted to do, and he said he wanted me to tell him. Therefore, I'm being client-centered. Right. And then I always ask them the question when I'm just, because I run standard check courses and training for instructors. I say, why do you think they said that? Why do you think they said, I don't know? Because they didn't know. Really? Think yourself back to school days. There'll have been somebody who used that as an escape mechanism. You boy, teacher asks a question. If I say, I don't know, teacher will leave me alone. So we learn this defense mechanism. So again, what I would normally say is if they're saying, what do you want to do today? I don't know. So well, here's some things we could do. Go choose one of those.
Yes, exactly.
In a very short time frame, their answer, I don't know, turns into, what's my options?
Yeah, brilliant. And that's one example. The other is the, so there's the I don't know, they can say, or just tell me, right? So the just tell me what I need to do could be holding them back in other parts of their life as well. So challenging that is, again, it's probably useful for the process of learning how to drive to push back a little bit on that. But that could also be just an automatic go-to for people to say, I don't know, just tell me. But it means they're never very engaged. They're never really motivated. So again, there's an opportunity here. And, you know, driving instruction leading to successful passing of the test, I think that's probably quite a significant moment for building the confidence of young people. You know, they've learned it for them, especially if they've learned it for themselves.
Yes.
If all they've done is they followed everything you know, they kind of memorize everything. They just do what their driving instructor told them. Then it's not adding as much value as if they've learned to make better decisions. Yeah.
It's well, it's an interesting thing because it leads on to a question that I want to ask. So when we met back in the day in 2012, you talked about the learner hearing their instructor's voice. You know, as the years went on, and that chimed with me at the time. I thought, oh, that's right. And I've kind of changed my mind on that.
Right.
I want them to hear their voice.
Right. That's nice.
Now, to be able to almost to self-coach themselves through situations, no matter where they are in the world, driving what vehicle in what situation, they can think their way through it.
Yeah.
They don't need somebody else's help. And it sort of harps back to the decision-making thing.
Yeah.
It's...
And Bob, there's the... you know, there are industries that are considered safety critical, and I'm sure driving instruction is one of those. But I think it applies to other safety critical situations, like people working on oil rigs, people working in disaster zones. When they're there under pressure, that's when they need to make their own decisions. And so they just need to have the questions. So whether it is the voice of the coach, what I meant by that is just remembering the questions. What questions did my coach ask me? But it's just, or your own voice. You do need to have, you know, what are the things I need to consider in this situation, rather than just simply memorizing, if the red light goes off, I have to do X, Y, and Z. It's having a more nuanced understanding and being, I guess, maybe what we're talking about is developing people's capability to make good decisions under pressure. Right, that's the thing. So you're about to overtake, and oh, I don't have enough time. Or, you know, at that point, it's not rote learning. It's not, oh, I know I need. They need to be able to make an in-the-second decision. And so maybe the coach, the training you're talking about is, like you said, it's helping people to make informed decisions and knowing how to do that, rather than just memorizing. If I'm on a road, this is, and on a B road, because there will be situations on the road which are unforeseen. Is of course, you know.
Well, there's a whole debate around what's unforeseen and what isn't. Also, it came from nowhere. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
Well, that's perhaps not true. I recall again. I was out for my birthday some time ago. August the 16th, 1996. I was 13. And my friends are all bad drivers. They're terrible. One of them had another accident.
Right.
And he said the car came from nowhere. I said, for goodness sake, man, how many times? I said, you know, nobody comes from nowhere. If you took the right observations, it wouldn't happen to you.
Yeah.
And August the 17th, 1996, an aeroplane landed on the M25. So he rang me and said, so what is it now, Morton? Look right, look left, look up.
Might be a plane landing, yes.
But it's just the statement that you make at the start of chapter 2 kind of covers this. And it's a question I wanted to ask. And, you know, what you're saying is one of the key aspects that makes coaching from different other types of conversation is the process that coaches and coachees engage in together. It's the role of the coach to provide clear structure and direction to the conversation, enabling the coachee to open up and extend their thinking in new and innovative ways. Now, I really believe that to be the case. And I'll always involve myself if there's a safety critical incident, and then we'll have a chat about it. But does focusing too much on us being the arbiters of safety take away from that opening statement? Are we kind of diluting it, I suppose, is the question. This is an area that I'm thinking, it's, I believe if we build in small, manageable steps, that the structured experiences that we provide are easily safety managed by the coachee. And we talk about, so how are we going to manage this? How are we going to manage that? What level of help do you want from me? At what point should I intervene? I think maybe helps with that. And so I believe that's where the focus of our industry should be, in shortening the steps we take, rather than just giving up on people and say, well, you can't do it because of the safety critical aspect. And I allowed myself to believe that for the longest time.
Yeah, interesting. And again, I don't know enough about your industry, Bob, but maybe in general, the idea of the size of steps that people take, that probably is the responsibility of the coach, because ultimately, in this case, there's a safety critical component. But in general, one of the intentions of coaching is to build that sense of self-efficacy, which is the belief, that I can do this for myself. So if at the end of a coaching conversation, my client sets a very big step, I might manage that down anyway. I might say, okay, well, that sounds like it sounds like a good place to be going. I'm wondering, should we break it into a few smaller steps, etc.? So it's probably, there's some similarity there about it is the coach's role, in your case, perhaps, to make sure that we're not putting people into danger. Of course, that's our main priority, but maybe it's possible to manage that by ensuring that and I think there'll always be exceptions to this. There'll always be times, like you said, where you must intervene for the safety of your learner and other people around them. But we want to minimize that, because that is going to be a big knock on confidence if we have to do that.
Yes. Well, I mean, the reality is that's the only moment they'll remember from a 2-hour session. And again, the argument that's used against coaching in our industry is, well, if you're going to be freeform, and if you say to them, well, what do you want to do today? And they've had 2 lessons, and they say, I want to drive on the motorway. What are you going to do now? Well, obviously, as you're saying, you'd break into that. And again, we've done the sort of, to make life easy, we've set it all out. That's all the lessons and their skill levels. Motorways here. We're here. Is that a sensible jump? And if they're still sort of arguing the case, you say, well, how fast do you have to go on the motorway? Well, 70. How fast have we traveled? Ooh, about 10. Is that a sensible jump? Should we build up to that? Should we take a run up at that, do you think?
I would say, if somebody says, I want to get on the motorway, we can agree with that sentiment to say, okay, in order to do that, these are the steps we need to have done by then. So let's get on with those. It's because I'm always a fan with coaching of not dampening down somebody's ambitions or goals. If somebody's saying, I want to become an astronaut, I don't want to say, oh, well, that's very little chance of you doing that. That's the thing that's motivating them. The big question in coaching is, okay, if that's the thing you want to do, what is it we need to be doing now? And that is negotiated with the coach. That, if you want to become an astronaut, well, better start studying maths or whatever it is, astronomy right now. And that's the thing we focus on. And that builds the person's confidence as they go forward. Yeah, interesting.
And again, linking back to the conversation with your driving instructor, you requested an assessment drive.
Yes.
Which is very different to having it imposed upon you. And in our industry, particularly in instructor training, where this advanced test, we generally take them for an hour's assessment drive.
Yeah.
And they arrive, we'll say, well, so how do you think you're driving? Go, well, I think I'm okay. I've been driving 20 years. I've not killed anybody and blah, blah, blah. And they get to the end and they turn the clipboard over and go, oh, wow. Oh my word, I'm worthless. what I've started to do, because I never, ever think I told anybody that they didn't really know. So what I say now is, well, if they request an assessment drive, and I try and discourage it because I don't think it's good. I'll normally get them the targets we have in the world. I say, tick off what you're comfortable with, leave blank what you're not. Let me look at the blanks. Okay, and I'll watch for those. But I generally have the clipboard and I'll say, well, okay, good drive. Well done. Enjoyed that. That was smashing. Do you enjoy it? How was it? Better than normal? What do you reckon? So, well, I've got a couple of things written down here. What do you think they are? And there's nothing written.
Right.
Because I can write the report. They're too fast. They're too close to the white line. The mirror signal maneuver routine's poor. The steering's bad. The positioning's poor. So why do I need to do an assessment drive? Everybody's the same. They all develop the same bad habits.
Yeah.
So it's as I've been on this journey, you know, and it's interesting to observe how my journey through the journey of discovery is mirrored in the book. So it must be a journey that others are having, and that they must have been having the same struggles. And it's this chasing the new question, the new technique, the new coaching model. You know, oh, I've discovered Oscar. I'll use that instead. No, but it took me long enough to discover that for myself. And I've gone back to the basic principles that we started with in our conversation all those times ago. It's about my way of being, about how I am with people, about the atmosphere that I create. My coaching skills, biggest one obviously, as you well know, is listening and active listening. And then my process. And the process is probably the least important. I mean, it needs to be managed, but I've made the significant changes in my practice, I feel, once I simplified it. And it was, I don't know, maybe it was my ego or maybe professional pride, whatever it was, drove me to try and be brilliant. I wanted to be a great coach. And there's something else I've heard you say somewhere else that, you know, it's like the way of being. You can't teach it. You can discover it. And it's the same for our learners. So once I let go of that, and once I let go of knowing more than they do as being one of my prime drivers, things became easy. So what would you say the one piece of advice is that you find yourself given more often than not to new coaches? But that was a very long question, wasn't it?
I know it was a very helpful question because we need the context for it. And I think I'm going to echo what you're saying, Bob, in that, you know, the ironic thing about learning to use coaching is that the process is the thing we spend a lot of our time learning about, how to ask the questions, etc. But I think the advice would be that, you know, hold the process lightly initially, and then that naturally it just becomes a natural way we have conversations in future. So I would say we still have to manage the conversation, but the process probably goes into the background a little bit. And, you know, I guess, and this is just emerged from our conversation, I think if I'm thinking, what would be the ideal outcome of driving instructors really embracing coaching? For me, it would be great if we ask people, you know, tell me about an educator that's had a really positive impact on you, that many of them would actually think of a driving instructor and say, you know, I've had lots of different teachers, but one of the people that's really helped me to learn the most or has had the nicest way of helping me learn was a driving instructor. Now that would tell us that it's working. And what I mean by working is, one, that there's genuine learning going on beyond, did I pass the test or not? So that's one. The other is that the young not always a young person, but when it is a young person, having learned something important about living life within their society, that's amazing. That's an amazing side benefit that's not often talked about. But Bob, I have a question for you. Is that okay to ask you?
Oh, yes, of course it is, Chris. Of course it is. Absolutely.
I'm, you know, because I'm thinking of, in the case of driving instructors, the time is allocated and it's paid for by the client. So in your case, for a 2-hour session, how much time do you spend at the beginning on the kind of the introductions and the contracting?
I generally spend about 40 minutes chatting through how it's all going to work, and that's not chargeable. And we talk about what do we expect from each other, how do they want it to be, and at first they go, well, I don't really know. I say, well, all right, is it okay if I shout at you? Oh, no, all right, then, so no shouting. Let's write that down, shall we? Let's no shouting. And we write it down. We both sign it at the end. How about if I take the mickey, if you make a mistake? Is that all right? Is that okay? If I point and go, well, look at that, you pillock. What have you done that for? What? No, I don't think I'd like that. No. So what would you like me to do? if things haven't gone the way we want?
Yeah.
What's our options here? So we go through all of that, and then I finish it with, and what do you think it would be reasonable for me to expect of you?
Nice. That's great.
And it
And,
just works.
and you don't charge for that.
No.
That's
We also then say, occasionally, because mom and dad generally pay for it, and we say, are you going to get any help along the journey? Well, my dad says, or my mom says, when I get the basics, they'll sit with me.
Yeah.
How would it be if we all got together before that and had a little chat about how we do it? Because otherwise, I'm faced with a situation where dad says, why have you missed third gear out? Mom
Yeah.
says, that's okay. You're not doing that in my car. That's
Yeah.
not how you do it.
Yeah.
No, let's get that mirror moved around here, so you've got to move your head like that. So
Right.
I find that if everybody's on side,
Yeah.
it takes less time, saves them money, makes my job easier. It's a more pleasant experience for the learner. I get more referrals and more recommendation work.
Yeah.
And I get repeat business over and over.
So that was my curiosity. I was thinking, are we doing that on the client's time, and how much time would be appropriate to spend that? So that sounds like a really great way of working with that. And that is a great coaching question, I think, is as people are thinking about what they're going to do, who out there is able to support you? I think that's a great coaching question, because it could be their friends, it could be an older friend who already drives, it could be parents, it could be colleagues at work. So connecting them to other sources of support is a great coaching approach.
I remember having a conversation with a parent. It was Danielle again, the girl who said, just because you're old and nervous.
Yeah.
Dad was offering advice, and she would say to him, no, Dad, no, that's not right. I'll watch you drive. You don't do that right, you know. So he phoned me and said, you have created a monster. But he did confess he's driving it got better because of it. And there's some key things, and I think there's some things that people get stuck with. And I observe in test center waiting rooms, instructors sat next to people saying, now don't forget, and remember to do this, and remember when you do that, it's that white spot you line up, and the pupil's like, oh, they get on test, they just think, what did he say I should do?
Yeah.
And if they've worked it out for themselves, they never forget that. No matter how much pressure they're under, they never forget it. I remember doing some work with a lady who was on our party. She couldn't get a particular maneuver right. She's a trainee instructor. And I'd said, well, what's the problem? Well, I don't know, I just can't get it accurate. Okay, let me watch you do one. And of course, it was going wide. I said, just stop there. So is this the outcome you were looking for? Now I'm a bit wide. Well, what's your options? So, well, I don't know. So, go on. And a question that I use a lot that I love. If you did know, what would you say?
Yeah.
And she stopped and thought about it. She said, well, I'd probably say I could go forward and have another go. Go on then. But just before you do, are there any other options? And I allowed the silence to do the work. And I used to be really uncomfortable with silence. I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
And she went, I could put a bit more steering on. Okay, so that's another option. Any other option? No, so I think that's about it. All right then. So choose one of those and do it.
Yeah.
And of course she nails it. So I don't know. I said, try it again. Nails it, try it again, nails it. So that's brilliant. Oh, hang on a minute though. I don't know what method I used. How am I supposed to teach my learner how to do it?
Yeah.
Are you smarter than them? Well, no. Well, if you worked it out, don't you think they can?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So just do that. Is this going the way you wanted it to? No.
Yeah.
What's our options?
Yeah.
And then there's some critical bits that what I see a lot of, because I've always been known for being good with nervous learners. I would get ladies in their late 20s, started learning to drive when they were 17, had an instructor who shouted, belittled them, whatever the reason. There's all sorts of other horrible things happening in our industry. And they gave up. But now they've got children, and getting on the bus isn't easy. So they're forcing themselves back into learning to drive, and they hate it. They hate driving. Mm. And it's because they can't make sense of it. The clutch control is the first thing where people get stuck, and it's a real hurdle. And instructors say, oh, there'll come a point where it'll drop into place. And they eventually teach themselves to do it somewhere in the subconscious, the connections get made. And another long-winded ramble here. I observed Tim Galway doing an interview with somebody about the backhand slice.
Right.
You can't teach that. You can't teach it. I can show you how I do it. I can't teach you how to do that. You know, if I get involved in hold it like this, do that. He said, it's feel. So he said, the best thing I can do is say, if I throw the ball at you and you apply your backhand slice, where do you want the ball to go? Well, over there, right. Did it go over there? No.
Okay.
What do we need to do different to make that happen? And of course, they're working out because they can. And the clutch control, it's the same thing. Let's just develop feel. As you bring that clutch, you might do an explanation that lets the power through to the wheels. Go, oh, we've stalled. What do you think happened there? I don't know. I might input. Came up a bit quick. Try lifting it a bit slower. See what happens. And we just develop the feel for it. Once we've got that, the steering and the ability to change gear without looking down, now we're safe to go on the road.
Yeah.
But as an industry, we put people on the road without good clutch control. Ooh.
So another question for you, Bob. So you do instruction both for car drivers and motorcycle riders,
yes,
right?
Yes, I do.
What's the main difference from a coaching perspective? Do you see a difference?
Not anymore. I did,
right?
Because I struggled with not having control, not having the ability to input.
Yeah.
And the fear of me putting a student into a situation they weren't ready for.
Yeah.
And it going wrong, because as you well know as a biker, if you get it wrong in a car, you might get injured, there'll be some damaged paint. You get it wrong on a bike, it's a different outcome.
Yes.
Being too close to a parked car in a car is an accident. Being too close on a bike, they're life-changing injuries. So I struggle with that. But now, again, the small, easily manageable steps, I'm finding it a lot easier. We identify what they're comfortable with and what they're not. And for most motorcyclists, it's corners. And slow moving. When you turn up at the biker cafe and you waddle in like a duck because you're terrified of dropping it in front of all your mates. Yeah. Slow speed machine control and cornering are the areas that most people struggle with.
Yeah.
And they're very simple fixes. And I just say, on the next car, try this.
Yeah.
And it works. And we just did a session the other night on slow speed machine control and the confidence that comes from people because they feel in control. Yeah. And it's the same with the clutch control. Once the learner feels that they're in control of the car and the car isn't in control of them, once the motorcyclist feels that I can recover this if it goes wrong, then it works. I may well have done some instruction.
Yeah.
And I allow myself to do that because I read Miles Downey's book, and he was saying that when he's teaching people to coach, he instructs.
Yeah.
Oh. And I suppose that's just setting up a structured experience, isn't it? And it's part of a wider coaching process if we then say, and what have we learned from this?
Yeah.
So I don't see a difference now because I don't allow myself the luxury of intervening when I don't need to.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
That makes sense.
I learned how to ride. Again, I had to do another test on my motorcycle here. And I was feeling empathetic for the instructor on the motorcycle behind me because I was thinking, he's probably more terrified than I am that I'm just, because all I've got is him in my ear, he's giving instructions. He can see hazards maybe that I can't see. And he wasn't saying, watch out for that, there's a car coming. He just told me what I needed to be doing, So, but I was thinking, wow, that is tough to be on a motorcycle.
If for example, oncoming vehicles are an issue for us on motorbikes because they can kill us much easier than they can in cars. So I use communications quite a bit on the bike, and the advanced organizations don't. And I'm doing some observation for a local group, and they said, you shouldn't use the comms. Why not? It gives me the opportunity. If I'm approaching on a long straight road and there's a right-hand bend, and I take the early cross view and I see there's a wagon down in the distance, I'll say to the person, what's your plan for the wagon? Wagon? What wagon? What wagon? Oh, that wagon.
Yeah. Right.
See him now. All right. How did I see him when you didn't? Is it because I'm superhuman? No. It's because I was looking in the right place.
Yeah.
And they discover that, there are other places to look in the conversation that follows. So it's fascinating. I know you're into your bike, so I don't know, maybe we could have a conversation at a different time about biking and all the bits and pieces that come with it. Because
the slow bit, I don't mind because I think I've put my ego to one side. So if I'm waddling, I don't mind. But it's the corners, like you say. It's just, the funny thing is, I was on a ride. I took my motorcycle down to France last month, right down to Monte Carlo. And for some reason, I can't remember exactly why. Yes, I just lost my confidence on one. It was a long ride. I was riding too long, actually, Bob, now that I think about it. 6-7 hours every day to try and get down there. Yeah. So I was tired. And then I think at one point I kind of lost concentration. Then I got a little bit anxious and I forgot a lot of the cornering stuff. And then, so what that's made me think about, then you lose the enjoyment. Well, then I wasn't enjoying the ride anymore. I was anxious. I was kind of tense on the motorcycle because I'm worried about it. And then I thought, wait a minute. I pulled over and I just had a time to think. I thought, I know that I've been riding for years now. And I had to remind myself about the look where you're going, you know, push out, all of this stuff. And so it's that importance of confidence kind of came back to me as well.
You lose it very quickly as a biker, much quicker than you would do in a car. And it's just, if you ever think about it, you know, there's also other factors at play, isn't there? You know, if you think about why do you ride a bike?
Yeah.
It's to enjoy the outdoors and to be in the countryside and the nice twisty roads.
That's right.
So you've just done 6 hours of stuff you don't enjoy. Hammering it out on the Autobahn or on the autoroute.
That's right.
We do it every year going down to Garmisch, and it's just, by the time you get to the end of it, even if you stop for breaks, you're sort of zoned out because it's just same.
That's right.
So it's developing some strategies to stop that happening. Quite often, you know, we'll play games. We have the comms, so we play car snooker. You have to spot a red car first, then you can have a colour. And the colours have to be in order. But it's just keeping your mind alert. And I also find that if I apply the more advanced skills, my mind's active all the time.
Yeah, I think that's good.
And I find that helps. I mean, it is interesting. I saw you on another interview where you talked about a Honda Civic that you had that was multicolored, and it was a great. You said it was a great and a wonderful car. But then I noticed the glint in your eye as you discussed your bike, because they have a different impact on us, don't they? I mean, they really do.
And I've really noticed that during this current period of coronavirus, and right towards the beginning, just before lockdown, I actually treated myself to upgrade my motorcycle.
Oh.
And it's because I just wanted, you know, something that gives me positive emotions. There's so much negative news around, you know, there's lots of restrictions. And for me, I don't know, it's probably the same for most motorcyclists, but once you put the helmet on and you're kind of riding, you're in your own space, you've got this sense of freedom. And so I don't have it now because it's in the garage, but it's an Ultra Glide Harley Davidson.
Okay.
And that's the one I took down to France because it's got lots of luggage. And but exactly what you said, Bob. Now that I've come back, a friend of mine asked me, are you going to be doing that again? And I said, I'll do it again, but I'm going to take longer because you're absolutely right. It was just motorway the whole time, massive articulated lorries on either side. I was thinking, I lost the sense of this is fun. It just became, just get to that place. That's the objective. So next time I'll go maybe down the coast, spend time stopping over, and, you know, so really this highlights the psychological part of it, because that loss of confidence was probably not a technical thing, but just psychologically, I just thought I'm not enjoying it as much and not focused enough.
I mean, did you apply a coaching process to that situation and think, well, what led to it? Did you evaluate everything that you did?
I just realized, I said, I need to kind of reset my mind about this. I realized it was a psychological thing, because I did say to myself, you haven't lost the skill. You know the skill. It's just I've lost the thinking that was needed. And then I did say to myself, I was riding, I said, look, this is a trip to enjoy. It wasn't a work trip. I'm here to enjoy myself. I took it a bit slower, didn't feel under too much pressure from other cars or whatever. And then gradually I could tell suddenly I'm enjoying the corners again. I'm looking forward to getting on the bike. So when it happens, it's real. You can't just put a switch to say, oh, don't be nervous. Just, I had to take the time to think it through.
So you made note that it was a new bike. Does that play into the scenario?
Yeah, you're right. It's a very heavy bike.
Very comfortable as well, though, isn't it?
You know, you're so perceptive, Bob, because one of the things I said initially when I bought, because I've had lots of different bikes, but none that were so comfortable. There's a little bit of anytime I sit in it, I was thinking I need to put my seatbelt on. It feels so much like a car.
Yeah.
You know, and it might be that to do with the steering as well, because it feels so much like a car that it's almost like you're thinking, I need to turn the steering wheel. But yeah, there were a lot of different factors, and yeah, there is something about hours on the bike. But that's one of the reasons I went down to the south of France. I thought I just want to spend a lot of time with the bike. Get to, maybe it's another relationship. Build a relationship with a motorcycle.
Well, the standing joke always is, isn't it? You never see a motorcycle parked outside a therapist's office, but I don't know if that's quite true. But so, I mean, it's just in analysing these things, and it's just, you know, it's very easy to dismiss them without really applying the process to it that helps you to evaluate why you got the outcome you got.
Yeah.
You know, that we always say that you shouldn't really do more than, you know, 250 miles in one stint. It's okay for me because I'm of an age now where I can only do 200 miles before I need a pee. So it's not an issue for me anymore.
No.
But it is interesting to note the differences in not only in perhaps your technical proficiencies, but was there a difference in the way you felt about the whole trip as these things happened? Yeah,
there was a lot of implications of that, because the whole trip is about the motorcycle, isn't it? So yeah, so it was really important to get that back on track. And yeah, but look, honestly, it's a delight to be on the motorcycle. I do love it. I do find it, it gives me positive emotions. And that's one of the things that positive psychology is very clear about. We need to make sure, and that probably applies to all of us in our professions as well, we have to allocate some time for enjoyment.
Yes.
You know, I know it's difficult times. I know there's terrible things going on, but part of our well-being does rely on experiencing positive emotions on a regular basis. So for me, the motorcycle gives me that. I enjoy being on it. The other thing, Bob, about relationships, I really enjoy the camaraderie of being a biker. And, you know, right at the beginning, I was talking about cultures and treating people of equal value. It really feels like that on a motorcycle. We don't know anything else about the other riders.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know whether they're the vice president of a country or whether they, you know, what it is they do. I have no idea. But we do acknowledge each other. We're both on a motorcycle. That's the thing we have in common. And I do really like that. Just yesterday, I pulled over. There was a motorcycle on the hard shoulder. The seat was up. So I pulled over. I said, "Are you okay? Everything going fine?" And he said, "Yeah, just overheat. I'm a bit hot and whatever." I said, "I have a bottle of water here." Yeah. That's just great. It doesn't happen in the car. I don't pull over every time I see a car on the hard shoulder. But I do if it's a motorcycle, which is...
It's funny. There's this sort of, like you said, it's like a brotherhood almost, isn't it? It sounds a bit cheesy. So I also know that, I can't remember where I saw you talking about. You talking about going to Spain. What will you do different on that trip to this trip?
Oh, no, that's a great... Now you're coaching me, and I love that.
I'll try and sneak it in.
The Spain trip, that's actually a clip in the Advanced Coaching Practice book where this really great coach called Dennis, he coached me around this motorcycle trip that I've never done. I've always thought about doing it, and I've always found excuses. So actually, very perceptive of you again, Bob. This France trip to Monte Carlo was a kind of a test run for that. I thought, if I can do this, then I just not much further down to go down to Spain. So the Spain trip is still on my to-do list, and it might have happened this month had, you know, the quarantine things not been. So there was a possibility that I was going to do France last month and then try and get down to Spain this month.
Right.
But that has really taught me a lot about spacing things out. And you talked about every 250 miles. The good or bad news is Harley Davidsons, as you probably know, they're a bit of gas guzzlers. So it doesn't go much further than 250 miles anyway. Right. I do find that I'm pulling up at petrol stations quite a lot. So I should probably use those better, because there have been times when I've just been thinking, yeah, fill up with gas, get a bottle of water, let's get going. Because I do have this thing I want to get to where it is. But maybe it's enjoy it a little bit more. It's a kind of more of a break. Maybe I allocate an amount of time.
I'm going to say, so if you've identified the stops as being perhaps critical, so what will be different about the stops this time to previous journeys?
Yeah. Well, the stops this time will be a kind of a destination in themselves. I'll kind of think,
I like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to stop there. So I'll pull up, have a little look around the shop, get a I do like hanging around near the bike with a drink or coffee. And I like, it's a Harley Davidson, so you got to spend more time cleaning it than riding it anyway. So it might be just give it a bit of a clean as well. When I've pulled up, clean the visor, the screen. Yeah, just more of a kind of get settled. Because now that I think about it, it was race to the place. I'm almost out of gas. The light's almost on. Better get in. Right. I need to keep moving. It wasn't a real break. It didn't feel like a rest.
Sure. I'm just interested to understand. So, were the pressures that you put on yourself, were they internal, external? Was it other people in the group that caused the push, or did you do it yourself?
I was riding on my own, believe it or not. And
right.
It is ridiculous because I was actually booking accommodation on the day. So I didn't even have, I have to get to, I don't know, Nice by this time. But I was putting pressure on how many miles I needed to do. I'd done some calculations and I was thinking, I have to do at least 300 miles. I have to do at least whatever. And so it was self-imposed. And again, I could have probably, I don't know. It's another thing I like about motorcycling, Bob, is I've just noticed it started raining here. The great thing about motorcycles is if you're riding and it's raining, there's no other option. You've got to keep riding. And I quite like that. So part of me, I do like setting myself challenging targets. But yeah, I think it's to do with allowing myself more time for breaks. Maybe more enjoyable breaks as I go through. And I'll experiment with it next time.
What would you say riding the bike brings you that driving the car doesn't?
Oh, a lot of things. So I would not have done that trip by car. I would have thought, first of all, I shouldn't admit this to a driving instructor, but I lose my concentration a little bit when I'm driving on the motorway, and it's a long straight motorway and I'm got it on, cruise control or whatever. So I don't really get as much fun out of it. The motorcycle, even when there's traffic, you know what it's like. You ride both the motorcycle and a car, stationary traffic on a motorway, you're no problem motorcycle. You kind of filter through. And for me, what motorcycle gives me is that sense of freedom. Lots of choices. You can park probably anywhere. You drive into a city center, anywhere. You can probably find a slot to park it. If you don't like, you're stuck in traffic one way, you can just turn around, go back the other way. So it gives me that freedom, although I always ride on my own. And Bob, I ride on my own because of the worry about peer pressure. A lot of probably other riders that I know, my sense is they probably ride a bit faster than I do. So for that reason, I'd like just to be on my own. But when I do get to places, I do interact with other bikers. So I do still get that social interaction. And there have been times I rode to Germany once where I met a couple of other riders on the ferry, and we did ride together for like 3-4 hours. And then we went our separate ways. So yeah, I think the bike does give me a lot. Yeah.
So just linking that, so you met some guys on the ferry, and how was that journey?
Again, I felt a bit under pressure, and I don't like to be. I felt the peer pressure again. Right, I didn't know them, so I couldn't say, "Hey guys, can you slow down a little bit?" Or can you? So there were bits where I was a little bit going a bit faster than I was comfortable with, for example. I noticed that, but I would catch up, and they probably picked up a little bit, and they probably slowed down a little bit. But yeah,
I think with group riding, it's what I've noticed, and my philosophy on this is that there's only in a group there's only ever one person happy with the pace. The rest are either thinking it's too slow or it's too fast, and then mistakes happen. So I'm very choosy about who I ride with.
Yeah.
And I will not. Occasionally we get that where a couple of my mates will fly off ahead. Come on, keep up. No, ride my own ride.
You're right, Bob, because there's also my riding isn't consistent all the time in the sense that, 7 hours into a day, I want to ride a bit slower. I need to be a little bit more alert. And so, yeah, I guess it's difficult. It would be difficult, therefore, to ride with a group unless you know them. This comes back to the importance of communication. If I could talk to the other person and say, look, I'm feeling a bit tired now. Can we just ease off a little bit? Or let's be careful on the overtakes at the moment, or, and when you take breaks, I do really like my freedom when I'm on a motorcycle. And I wouldn't want to be in a group where they're saying, no, let's wait till the next services, when I'm thinking I need to get a cup of coffee now.
Yeah, there's lots of pluses and minuses for that. I mean, what we tend to do as a strategy is we say we're riding for this number of miles and we will all meet at those services. So if we separate in between, it doesn't matter.
Perfect.
That's a way of managing it. Would that be a way you could manage your journey? To say, I'm stopping there.
Yeah.
And then there, and then there. Just as a thought.
I think so because there is a bit of me on a motorcycle that I set myself challenges. So I might already have thought I'm probably going to stop at this services, but when I'm there, I think, you know what, maybe I can go a little bit further. So that would be a way of doing it, to decide this is where I get my breaks and then stick to that. I'll try that. I'll try that.
I mean, I think for what I'm kind of picking up is that you've identified where the problems are and you know what it does to you.
Yeah.
You know that it's not a good thing. Yeah. And the plan is not to have that happen again.
Yeah, that's right.
What's the strategy for making sure that it doesn't?
Yeah, no, great. I think what I've already thought about is, should I be on the motorways all the time? Because like you said, I don't enjoy that part of it. It's really just a way of getting there. And I love so when I get close to where I'm going, the moment I'm looking forward to is getting off the motorway, and then suddenly you're in beautiful countryside, and there's no, France, England, they're beautiful places to ride. So yeah, it's interesting. But now for that trip to Spain, I feel I'm ready now, because I feel I've got no more excuses. I've got the right bike for it. I love riding it. It's a great bike. I learned through this trip about things to do and not to do, maybe. So I'll give myself a little bit longer. Yeah, and then maybe it's just a check-in every day at the end of the day to say, am I still enjoying this?
So some questions occur to me. Which is the most important to you, the journey or the destination?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know that, I don't know if you've seen the long way.
Yes, yeah.
Down, right? There was the long way down where Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman, they went to South Africa. That actually came up. Charlie Borman and Ewan McGregor had a bit of a falling out, and it was obvious one of them was about the destination. The other one was about, let's enjoy. Charlie Borman was saying, look, I'm on here because I want to enjoy the ride. You're here because... And so for me, personally, I know that I do this because I want to enjoy it. But there's also part of me which likes to challenge myself. That's something I just need to be aware of a little bit more, because I'm always thinking, can I get another 100 miles in now? Can I, and I think I just need to be aware of that tendency to push myself a bit.
Sure.
I
think we all like a challenge, don't we? We do, but is there a way of challenging yourself that's less safety critical?
Yeah, there is. You're right. The last hour that I decide to do, I'm probably not really enjoying it by that point. So that comes back to reminding myself, look, the whole point of this is to enjoy it. And all of the stuff, the ferry crossings, they were all flexible. There was, I was thinking, I need to get there. I know that if I get there an hour later, they're going to put me onto the next ferry, or, so a lot of the kind of the stress I was putting on myself probably. Overall, I enjoyed the ride, but there were some things there that, yeah, it's been helpful just to talk through with you.
I mean, if we measure the bit, if, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, scaling gets used a lot. I've turned my back on it a bit because it's a bit judgmental, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where 10 is the most enjoyable moment of the journey and 1 is the least enjoyable moment of the journey. Can you identify those 2 points?
Yeah. Well, most enjoyable part of the journey was probably getting to my destination. That was one of them. The other most enjoyable moment was just in the region of Sancerre. It's a winemaking region in right, not too far from Paris. Again, it was that moment I'd gotten off the motorway and I was just in vineyards and beautiful curvy roads. I stayed in a little chateau there. That was just magical. And I was saying, this is what it's all about. And you know what it's like on motorcycles. There are 10s and 1s mixed in, and I think that's all part of the thing. So those were the 10s, is getting to my destination, actually stopping by and visiting 2 friends. I saw a friend on my way down in just outside Paris, and then I stayed over at another friend's on the way back. They were great because park up the motorcycle, have a glass of wine, chat to friends. That's just wonderful. So yeah, those were the 10s in all of that. And the 1 is purely about that moment where I just lost confidence on the motorcycle, on the curves, and just thinking, yeah, it just doesn't feel right. The wind's pushing me or whatever.
Yeah, it's
just
an awful feeling. Yes.
And you know, thousands of miles literally from home. So it's not like I can say, you know what, forget it. I'm going to call it a day. My motorcycle and I are in a different country, literally, I think at least 1,000 miles away from home. So that knowledge that either you just got to blunder through, which I didn't want to do with that, anxious and not sure. But that started as a 1, but regaining that confidence, maybe it wasn't a 10, but it was a 7 or 8 to say, you know what, I don't know, how did I forget this? And then think, you know, now I'm enjoying it. More comfortable.
It's an interesting thing. It's just I was just thinking out loud here. How much do the 1s detract from the 10s in the overall scheme of things? And at what level is it tolerable? Is that a 5, a 6, a 7?
Yeah. That's a great question. You see, so probably we want to avoid the 1s, but this is just probably my own worldview, but I think the 3s and the 4s really are great. I think it's good to have 3s and 4s, so we appreciate the 7, 8, and 9s more. So I don't mind those. I think, yeah, and it's exactly the same. You're riding through completely soaked on a motorcycle because of unexpected rain, drenched, you know. But I know that I'm going to be riding into the sunshine at some point, and my clothes are going to dry out. So it's the lower you go there, the better it is when you come out into the sunshine. So probably a lot of analogies in motorcycling for kind of life-related things.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Great book if you've not read it.
I've read it. I love it.
And it's all about just that. And it's just to step back a bit, if you'll permit me.
Yeah.
When I asked you about what the favorite part of the journey was, your first answer, the first 10 was destination.
Yeah.
Is that part of the journey?
It's kind of getting there. It's that maybe it's not part of the journey, but I get a strong positive feeling to say, you know, look, I've done it. I've done it.
I've achieved that. Yeah.
It was, and it was a little bit further than I was expecting to go. I hadn't set it as my destination when I started, actually. But I thought, I've made it all the way. Because actually, when I went there was a possibility I could go north to Holland.
All right.
I've got a relative living in The Hague. And so all I knew initially was I'm going on to the continent. And then because of coronavirus things and other factors, I thought, you know what? I looked at the map and I thought, well, I might be able to even get down to Monaco or whatever. And Yeah, so it was, I thought, will it be possible? I wasn't even sure. It looked like a long way. So there was a kind of a, yeah, I've done it. I'm all the way down here. Which gave me, but you're right, that's not about the journey, that part of it. But definitely one of the highlights of getting there was fun.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of sort of planning and preparation. Is it worth having the map and writing where you think the 10s and the 5s and the 1s might be?
Oh yeah, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Because I would know there's ones on the long stretch across France, because it's almost from one corner to the other, from Calais down to Monte Carlo. It is kind of cutting right across. You're right. If I had done that, I would have known that there would have been a high meeting a friend in Paris. I would have thought, well, that's going to be. Then I would have known there's going to be a bit of a stretch of low numbers. Probably, but it didn't have to be low numbers, Bob, if I had broken it maybe into 3. I could have broken it into 3 and added another 5 or 6, which is, you know, visiting a castle or spending a time in a nice little village. I could have built something in.
If you weren't aware, there's some phenomenal motorcycling roads in the Central Massif. And there's a place there called the Bikers Retreat. So not only do you get a nice place to stay, but you get to talk to other bikers. And I think if you look on the map and you identify anywhere that might be a 1, is it worthwhile searching for something that might be a 10?
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Good idea to
break
up. Yeah. Right. Well, I don't know how we got into talking about this, and probably.
I know, and we've been talking a long time. It's a question I did want to ask you is: do you coach at home?
No, that would be. You talked about advice, so. I do a lot of coach training and of training people to be coaches. I mean, and that is a question that comes up, and it's a great question to come up because I think the coaching approach applies way beyond a coaching conversation.
Yeah.
But I think if it comes down to actually coaching a family member, a child, a relative, it's too complicated, particularly for somebody learning. I think too complicated in general, but particularly for someone learning. And the reason is we do have an interest in what family members, let's say, do. And so it becomes very difficult to be completely objective and detached, which is necessary. So I would say definitely use a coaching approach with family members. So definitely like ask more questions, listen better, summarize things back, use some of the techniques. But I would say if somebody in my family needed coaching, I'd probably refer them to a friend or somebody else I know.
Yeah,
because, to give you an example, if I were coaching my son and he said, hey, I want to, I don't know, take a 5-year gap break. If I'd have an interest in that, I'd be saying, really, does it have to be 5 years? So that's why it makes it difficult. That's why it makes that difficult. So I would counsel against coaching family members.
Yeah, that's definitely a 1, isn't it?
It's risky, you know, because there's pre-existing relationship there already. And, you know, sometimes people, when I'm coaching them, would share something to me that they don't even share with their family members or even with their friends.
Yeah.
You know, and that's because the coaching is temporary. They know I'm going to keep it confidential. So there's no consequences of them telling me something. Whereas with family members, you know, it's a much longer relationship. So there are some risks involved.
There are. And the reward is probably not worth it.
Maybe.
Well, Christian, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you about all things to do with coaching.
Thank you for the coaching there. It would be nice to meet up somewhere once you're riding again, maybe one of those biker places. We could just meet up, have a chat.
Absolutely. Well, I always say that, you know, my other half says to me, what do you do there?
Yeah.
Just drink tea and talk nonsense.
Good. I'm looking forward to it then.
It's a little hyacinth for my soul.
Wonderful.
Well, anybody who's not read these books, shameless plug again.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend them.
Right.
The simplicity of the approach in the introduction is just, it's the starting place. And if you get those fundamentals in place, it just works. So thank you ever so much for your time today, Christian. It's been a joy.
Thank you for your time, Bob. I've really enjoyed it, and you're a great person to talk to. It's so easy to have a conversation.
Well, we'll have to have some more talking bike-related nonsense at some point over a cup of tea at a biker cafe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care then, Bob.